Can you explain a little bit about why the term Indian law is still used? I think maybe some people might not be aware of that, or even if that is still the correct terminology.
So, we use the term federal Indian law when we're generally talking about this area of law. It has a long history. It's most concrete to point to Title 25 of the US Code, which is where a lot of the laws that Congress passes about Native people go. And that title is simply called Indians. And so a lot of the nomenclature of federal Indian law is referring directly to that term. Of course, when you're talking about Indigenous people, talking about a Native person, rule of thumb is it's always best to directly identify which tribe they're from first, if possible. But that does lead towards tribal law, which is something different from federal Indian law.
Well, that leads into my next question, which was if you could explain a little bit the difference between federal Indian law and tribal law.
Sure. So, federal Indian law is really about the relationship between tribes in this country and the federal government. And it's governed in a large part by that Chapter 25 of the US Code. It also has to do with the treaties that tribes signed, other executive orders, policies. It's really focused on the federal government and its relationships with tribes. Now, contrast that with tribal law. Tribal law is the law that each individual tribe is using to govern themselves, their community members, how they're portraying their government to the rest of the country and internationally. And with, I think the number is 575, at least federally recognized tribes right now, there's a huge variation in tribal law.
What do you think some classes or some ways that a law student might start to learn about these things? Not every school is going to offer everything, but what are some resources that people can look up to turn their head to start becoming aware of Indian law and federal Indian law in all areas of the law?
So, I'm going to start by answering this with the hopes that there are a few college students who are interested in going to law school listening to this. And to them, I'll say, look into your college's American Indian Studies department or history department and see if you can take a class focused on Native American history, because so many of the fundamental concepts of federal Indian law and the reason that the world of federal Indian law is the way it is are rooted in history. They're rooted in the treaties that were signed by Native nations. And so having a base understanding of that does get you a leg up in law school. Now, if we're just in law school, of course, if your school offers a federal Indian law class, which quite a few do offer that one course in federal Indian law, that would be an important one to take. If they don't, and beyond that, some of the other core classes to help you learn about both tribes and many of the legal issues that tribes encounter regularly would be property law, because land ownership, the status of lands that's held by Indian tribes, you can learn a lot about that in property law. Same goes for family law courses. If you have a great family law instructor, they will hopefully have a unit on the Indian Child Welfare Act. So those would be the two that stick out to me in my mind. Beyond just taking courses in law school, however, I would also recommend law students that are interested in either pursuing a career in Indian country or that just understand it's going to be best for them to have a baseline level of understanding of this field would be to look in to see if their law school has a chapter of NALSA, the Native American Law Students Association, because attending those
Mhm.
meetings and just workshopping and being in conversation with other students that are both interested in Indian law or are Indigenous themselves offers a really good level of learning and understanding for law students. Once you get a little bit further in your law school career, you can also look at things like the Tribal In-House Council has a really good set of resources. Most states have a chapter of a Native American bar association that usually welcome law students to participate and start to learn about this field.